Okay. I'm Kathleen Kemp, and I am one of the buyers at the Open Door Bookstore. And I'm thrilled this evening to get to chat with Herb Terns about his book, Iron Sharpens Iron. So I'll give you a bio first. Schenectady resident Herb Terns is a writer, adventurer, and hypothermia connoisseur who accomplished a rare double disqualification in his first triathlon. A child of the Catskills, he came to the capital region to pursue a degree at the University of Albany. He has worked in production and information technology at the Times Union for more than 20 years. He also writes an outdoors column for the newspaper's sports section. In Iron Sharpens Iron, he turns his hand to fiction, telling the story of Colden McIntyre, an Adirondack native who sets out to overcome his troubled past by winning the Lake Placid Ironman. Herb, welcome.
Thank you.
Yes. So first of all, I have to tell you that your book has sold very well for us. We've sold almost 36 copies. So it's a bestseller for us. So congratulations. And we love having the book. And I have thoroughly enjoyed reading this book. So I just got to put that out there. So I have just going to have a conversation with you, ask you a few questions, and I'm pretty much going to let you do most of the talking. So I'm going to start with my first question. If you could just tell me about your process, what it was like to start writing this book. When did you start? What brought you to this idea?
Well, I had kind of kicked around the idea for a little while. I think that everyone always wants to know how long it took you to write the book, which is it's a tough question, but it's basically about 8 years or so. I actually started working on something else partway through, but I guess the book is kind of like a bus where characters kept getting on, and I kept thinking they were going to not stay for very long, but then I ended up really liking a lot of them. Steve Hadley if you read the book, Steve Hadley is probably one of the people that I thought, Steve Hadley is just going to be here for a few minutes and then he's going to get off the bus. But I really liked Steve Hadley a lot. So he stayed. The beginning of the book, if you read it now, originally was about 75 pages in. So I chopped off a big lump of it. So Steve Hadley was kind of a bit character, and then he came and I couldn't get rid of him. And so he just kept showing up everywhere. He's one of my favorite guys. But then I think everybody in the book who started out as, on the periphery, they just kept coming in, and I liked more and more people. And that's why the book ends up being 400 pages is I just, I wanted to hear more about other people's stories. So the characters just kind of kept growing on me. So I think Rab was really not going to be that big of a part of it. And then, his story was kind of compelling the more I got into it. So a lot of people just kept getting on the bus and staying on it. At the end of the book, it's a big bus full of people, which is, but it's all people, hopefully, that people will like, that readers will like.
Yeah, and it's a great group of characters, I think. I love the way you develop the characters so that you do get to know them and grow quite fond of them, actually. And as I was reading it, I was thinking, wow, I want to hang out with this person. I want to go have burgers with him.
It makes it really hard to cut parts of it out because you like everybody that's in there. And so when you have to get, you get rid of some stuff, it's hard because you really like the people by the end of the book.
Right. Are any of the characters based on people that you have crossed paths with in real life? Or, loosely based on them, I guess? Are there people that you recognize?
There's maybe types of people. I think maybe, I think a lot of the people in the book start off as possibly kind of rough composites of people that I've met, but then kind of the more they live with me, the more I come up with who I think they are. And so by the end of the book, I don't think they really resemble whoever they might have started out to be. I think the only person who is kind of roughly based on someone real is Coach Honey, who I read a book called Swimming to Antarctica a couple of years ago by this writer, Lynn Cox, who is a kind of roughly has done some of the stuff that Coach Honey had did. She's this phenomenal open water swimmer who like literally swam to Antarctica, and she swam from an island in Alaska to an island in Russia across the Bering Strait. Like she's an amazing, amazing person. It's a great book. So I'd say Coach Honey is the only person that's really based on anybody real at all. And I don't really think most of the people in the book, people have accused me because it's a first person book of being Colden McIntyre, but I can assure you anyone who's in any danger of winning the Lake Placid Ironman does not resemble me in any way whatsoever. That is as fictional as it gets.
Well, I love the name Colden McIntyre, by the way, and it's a very Adirondack name. So did you, there's Colden is one of the high peaks, and there's the McIntyre range, right?
Right.
And so did that influence your selection of his name? I just love that name, Colden McIntyre, and every time I read it, I was like, okay, this is the Adirondack, this is the high peaks, this is Lake Placid, this is really cool. So
Yeah, I had messed with it a little while, a bunch of times, and there's a bunch of other place names in there, like the Jessups are, there's a Jessup River, and Hadley, of course, there's a mountain in the Adirondack. So, and I'm not really sure how I got around to Cole. I liked that you could shorten the name from Colden to Cole, and because he seemed like a dude who would have a nickname to me. Right. So I kind of like that about him, but I was a little worried because it's kind of like Holden Caulfield from Catcher in the Rye, but I overcame that fear and I stuck with him.
Right. And so the book takes place in and around Lake Placid, and you selected Lake Placid. I know you come from a small town yourself, so did you select Lake Placid for any particular reason, as opposed to other parts of the Adirondacks, other towns like Saranac Lake, for example?
Yeah, well, they paid me. Lake Placid gave me some money to set the. I'm just. No, it's funny. I was going up there for a winter hike with a friend of mine, and she was telling me that she wanted to move to Boulder, Colorado, because she likes to do things outdoors, and she felt like people around here didn't like to do that kind of stuff, and I said in this car ride up that we're going to Lake Placid. Like, there's only two places on earth that have hosted the Winter Olympics 2 times, and we live like a 2-hour drive from one of them, because Lake Placid has hosted the Winter Olympics twice. So I think there's kind of an energy around Lake Placid that is just, when you're there, you want to do stuff. You want to be outside. It's just, even just walking down Main Street, seeing Ironman tattoos and the peaks around, and like every car either has a canoe or a bicycle on it. There's just something about being in that place that just, I think, brings it out in people. So I wanted to kind of set it there. And I think the other thing is, there's a lot, depending on how you read it, but there's a lot in the book that kind of plays with this kind of economic differences between, these places of beauty tend to bring, maybe like the wealthier people from cities. And I think that, there's kind of a conflict kind of baked in between, the people who come to town and the people who can buy the best places in town, and the people who actually live there and work there. So Lake Placid, the place I grew up in the Catskills, in the Hunter Mountain area, has that, and Lake Placid really kind of exemplifies that for me. There's a spot there for everybody, but I think there is, the fact that it's, for the last 100 or 200 years, it's drawn like the wealthiest Americans. It was just something that really just kind of screamed to be in the book. Like there was no, once I had that place, and I think to also set a race about a triathlon, it was such a natural thing. I think I had a lot of bad ideas for this book, and I think underneath the bad ideas, there's a good idea. You just haven't really worked hard enough to find it. So Colden and his crew had moved around a little bit through New York before they landed in Lake Placid, but once they got there, there was no getting them out of that spot.
Right. And I think in Lake Placid, because of the proximity and the high peaks, there's all these this possibility of going out into the backcountry. And so you write about for the Times-Union, you're an outdoors columnist. So were you able to draw on your own personal knowledge of so much of this backcountry and bring it in? Because I was reading a passage in the Sawtooth Range, and it sounded rough. And I'm like, people go there, and my son has hiked a lot of these peaks, so I know of them, but when the way you described it was intense. And so in your own personal experience, you've encountered this.
Oh, very much. I think I had gone just about every place that's in the book, except the Sawtooth Range. And I have a friend of mine, if you're not familiar with Adirondacks, there's these people that they climb the 100 highest peaks in the Adirondacks. And a lot of the 100 highest peaks don't have trails. So these kind of like gnarly bushwhacks. And I'm not super interested in doing them, but I hang out with people who think that that's fun. So a friend of mine was going into the Sawtooth Range, and I had been thinking about like having Colden go in there. So I was like, that's perfect, and he was kind of disappointed when we got done with the hike, because he asked me what other peaks I have to do, and I'm like, this is the only, like, I only came here for research, like this was the only thing that I was interested in. But that's pretty much what it's like. It's kind of an awesome, it's kind of amazing. I think that we live in New York, and I think a lot of people tend to think of New York City, but the fact that we have places as kind of raw and wild as the Sawtooth Range is really one of the great places, things about where we live. It's amazing. So yeah, I've visited almost all of those, almost every place that's in the book. I haven't done nearly as much of the awesome things that Colden did, but I've been in those spots, I guess.
That's awesome. That's great. And so why did you choose triathlon as, well, I mean, obviously it's Lake Placid, and that's where the Ironman is every July. Is you drew on your own experience of having done triathlon as well, so that was something you knew?
Yeah, my bad experiences from doing triathlon, but it's kind of, I had flirted with kind of different ideas like running, but I think there's something about the triathlon that really kind of drew me to it. I think in part because it's 3 different sports, and I think a lot of people go into triathlon and they might be good at like 1 or 2 elements. They might be good runners or good cyclists, but because it's swimming, biking, and running, most people, even really good triathletes that I know, went into it and were terrible at one part of it. And I think that the awesome part of that is, for me, was when you do triathlon, it kind of bakes in a humility to the sport, because fast runners that I know, they don't really know what it's like to be like a middle of the pack guy. It may be in theory, but for the most part, a lot of them have been fast when they were in college and when they were in high school. Whereas, a lot of the really good triathletes that I know, they remember how hard it was to try and do the swim, or not being a cyclist and riding the bike. So there's kind of a humility baked into triathlon that really appealed to me as a participant. But I also think that as a character, it's kind of great to see someone go through, have to go through that learning curve that they want to. If it were just running, I don't think it would be quite as interesting. But it's something that you have to learn. And I think there's some parts of Colden's journey where people can help him. Brad can help him on the bike, and Ratio can help him on the run. But I think there's when you're in the water, there's only so much that people can help you. And I think that's it's kind of an apt metaphor for life, in that you get a lot of help from a lot of people, and there's some things that you kind of have to figure out on your own. I think the other thing that worked really well for triathlon was, I'd mentioned kind of this economic disparity that kind of plays around Lake Placid, and Triathlon is it's I would say running, if you're a runner, you really just need, sneakers to be a runner, probably shorts. You probably want to run with shorts and a shirt too. But, triathlon, there's the bike and there's a wetsuit a lot of times. And, the fees to join a triathlon are a lot higher than they are to do a 5K or to do a marathon. So I think that, there's kind of this idea that Colden's going into this, kind of a wealthier person's sport, that has some kind of barriers to entry. It's symbolically, it made it really good compared to, say, if he was doing the Boston Marathon or the New York City Marathon. Like there's all these other things going on with triathlon. So, and the fact that I get to plop him in Lake Placid and just go out and, into the high peaks and, swim in the lakes, in the lake country west of Lake Placid. It's just, you couldn't put to put a guy like him in that spot is just, it shows off everything that Lake Placid has going for it.
Absolutely. And so I love this word. I never knew this before. I don't know if I'm going to say it correctly. Pronoia?
Yes.
Yes.
I've never heard anyone else say it, so I've only read it.
Well, I don't know if I said it correctly, but I'm trying. But I love that word. And can you tell us more about it?
Yeah.
And its relevance to the book?
Yeah, I try to, I think one of the things, you kind of figure out when you sit down to write something is you kind of learn what you think about something when you sit down to write about it. And I kind of thought a lot about small town life in writing this book. And as someone who grew up in a small town, and I looked around at it and said, I can't wait until I can get out of this place when I get older. And now I'm older, and now I go back to that place. So, but I kind of wanted to. The word pronoia, I think, is relatively new to me. I think I read about it a few years ago, but I think the concept of it goes back a long time, at least in my experience. And when I was younger, I worked in a cannery on the southeastern coast of Alaska on the Kenai Peninsula. And when I went to Alaska, I was young, and I probably didn't have enough money to get back from Alaska if I didn't find a job in the cannery. So we didn't have a car or anything, the people that I was there with. So we pitched our tent around in the parking lot of the cannery. And we would work, like 12 or 16-hour shifts in what was basically a giant refrigerator where you're standing in ice all day. And at the time, like, I was reading like Ayn Rand and stuff. And, when you're like a young man, like, that kind of stuff like appeals to you, like that life is hard and you have to like look out for yourself. And but there was a couple of nights after work every every week where our foreman would kind of drive through this little tent town that we had, and we were miles from nowhere, and there was a lot of Mexican migrant workers there, and Russian workers, and so our foreman would come through, and he would drive his truck through this little tent town that we had, and he would fit as many people in the back of his pickup truck as he could, and he would drive us around to these church suppers where they would have these dinners for cannery workers, and for people who were working physical jobs like 12 or 16 hours a day, to walk into these church suppers where there's like homemade meatloaf and lasagna, it was just amazing. We just fell on that stuff like Vikings on the British coast. So I remember one particular night we went in, and I think it was raining, and they had a tent over the food, and so we ate a lot, and we kind of had to leave through this one door, and through the door the people from the church were there, and in addition to making all this food for us, they had plastic bags filled with food for us to bring back to our tents, like oatmeal and stuff for us. And I'm like a relatively like blue collar guy, like accepting charity was not like a thing, especially when I was younger. So, they tried to give me this bag, and I was like, no, I don't want it. And just the kind of the expression on this woman's face that, like, she you realize like life isn't all about being hard then. Like it was, she really, she didn't care about a bigger car or like a fancy house. Like she wanted someone who needed this food to have it. And, that's pronoia. That's where the concept came to me. And, the way I ate then, the food probably only lasted a couple hours when I got back to my tent, but just the idea of that and that just the decency. I think there's people everywhere who do that stuff, but I think they don't talk about it. And if they do, it's a whisper. And I think, kind of the bad things that happen to us, maybe the thing in Boulder yesterday, right? Like that's, that gets a megaphone and a Marshall stack of amps. But I think, there's decency around. And I tried to, highlight that in the book as much as I possibly could.
Right. Lots of daily sort of quiet heroes in a way. And like I was reading like with Aunt Jackie, for example, and just her wisdom and she just always sort of brings him back. And I just love those types of characters who are just very quietly there, always guiding, whether they're saying it out loud or not, just by their actions. So that's pronoia, right? It's sort of this way of giving that's not always obvious to everybody, but they're still doing something important.
Right. It's kind of the opposite of paranoia, right? That there's this kind of quiet conspiracy of people who are out to help you.
Right. Yeah.
That's small town life, in addition to some small town life that drives you crazy. But there is really that sense of that, I think, and it's in every town, not just small towns. But I tried to kind of bake that into the book and maybe raise the volume of those people a little bit. They're certainly not going to do it themselves.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And so just out of curiosity, just going in a different direction for a minute, are there writers who have inspired you or any writers who you've drawn sort of ideas from of how you want to apply it to your own writing? Is there anybody that you particularly like or can talk about?
I mean, I think I read a lot of the kind of the standard stuff when I was a kid. I think, Westerns kind of brought me into like Hemingway and Jack London. You can't go to Alaska and not read Jack London books. I think the most exciting thing I've seen is someone had written that there was Richard Rousseau like elements in Iron Sharpens Iron, which is I'm a big Richard Rousseau fan. I mean, I read I think most of the people are around Albany, Toni Morrison and Russell Banks, but he's the guy that I think that really Rousseau really appeals to me. But I'm kind of scattershot in my reading. I walk into the open door and I have no idea what I'm going to get, and then I just walk out with something. And there's so many great books out there that I've been especially honored with people who are buying mine, because I know there's a lot of books and there's a lot of things that people want to do with their time. So for someone to sit down for a couple hours with characters of mine is really an honor.
Yeah, it's a great read, actually. It's a fun read. And I've enjoyed it very much. So as a bookseller, for me, it's easy we talk about, hand selling. And for me, I'm really excited to put this book in people's hands.
Thank you.
And so just another question, when talking about Iron Man specifically, when you were writing this book, was it almost your own sort of mental Iron Man? Like, it took you a while to write it, right? And so, there's a lot of training that goes into an Iron Man. And for you, was in your own mind, was this like your own Iron Man, I guess, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And I think I didn't really think about it until after I finished the book, but I think, there's a lot of times in the book where people, will say, Cole, the other guys who are doing this are, they're doing it full time, right? They're not trying to run a restaurant and also on the side, like try and win this thing. And I think as someone, who's working full time, as you mentioned in the beginning, like in IT, and trying to write a book on the side, like it was very much relatable to me to do that. that, this kind of was my mental Iron Man. And I think the other thing too is that, you have to kind of be your own kind of quality control. I think as the character in the book has to be his quality control and decide how, if he's done enough work. And I think, the book is very much the same way, where it's so very tempting to just say, it's done. I've written all these pages and it's done. And, I've had some great beta readers, including my wife, Jillian, who introduced us, who, read the book, I don't know how many times, and, gave me advice. And then there were other people too, my cousins and my neighbors who read the book and, asked for more in this part or a little bit less in this part. And you kind of, you kind of hone it. And you kind of hope that story is in there and you can chisel it from stone and hope that you're not butchering it instead. But yeah, I had a lot of help. It was one of the things I didn't realize when I spent a lot of time writing by myself, but you also get a lot of help with something like this, including the people at the Open Door putting on awesome events like this, and also putting my book in front of the store, which was awesome.
So how does it feel to have this book out in the world? I mean, is it surreal to you? It's gratifying. It must feel pretty cool to have this, sort of out there.
It is surreal is really the appropriate word for it. I pictured writing, and I think I finished the book and then I started another book because I really didn't know what to do. So this whole process of having it out there, I think I was in the Open Door and someone bought it. I heard someone ask for it at the counter, and that's just bizarre. The fact that people ask me to sign the book still seems insane to me. I walked into the bike shop, and the guy behind the counter said, "You have a book out, don't you, about triathlon?" And it's like, it's a surreal thing it still doesn't really quite feel real to me. I'm not really sure when that's going to happen, but I'm glad that people are enjoying it.
Yeah.
For the most part.
Yeah, it's I guess we're getting toward the Q&A period, but I do have to ask you a question. How do you double disqualify in a triathlon? Like, what is that?
It's really hard. It's really tough to do. It might be the next book is I might give hints on how to double disqualify, but I didn't really know that it could be a thing before. But in my first, when I kind of got this, the triathlon bug to do it, I wrote a few years ago, I wrote about picking your first triathlon because I did it really poorly. And so I had this kind of itch that I wanted to do this triathlon, and I trained a lot, in a pool, in a swimming pool in Niskayuna. And then I signed up for a race down below Kingston. And the swimming part was in the Hudson River, which is not the Hudson that Colden plays in, where it's really beautiful in the Adirondacks. It's like this dark, murky, the Hudson. And when I first got into the water, you just look down and it's just darkness. And I hadn't really had that from swimming before, just not being able to see anything. So I was kind of discombobulated. And I also hadn't been swimming with lots of people. And I hadn't realized they were going to crash into me, which I didn't enjoy. And then there was seaweed that catches on your hands and your feet and stuff. And I had not planned for any of this stuff. So when I got about halfway around the course and I was exhausted because I was kind of panicking a little bit. And I don't know if you've ever envisioned being pulled out of the swim portion of a triathlon. I had never envisioned it until it happened, but these dudes come along in this big boat. And I guess when they picked me up, they said, "Are you done?" And I said, "Yes, I'm done." And I kind of thought they would just pick me up in the boat and bring me to shore, but that's not what happened at all. They picked me up and they put me in the boat, and then you ride in the boat behind all the other terrible swimmers who they think they're going to have to pitch out. And you sit there, and while they're doing this, there's guys driving the boat and they are making fun of the people that are still in the water. And this is especially nice for me because then I get to hear this, and I know that 5 minutes ago, I was the guy that they were making fun of in the water. So we pick about 5 other swimmers up. And we get in the boat, and then they turn the boat towards shore, and the guy says, "You guys can swim from here." And I said, "Well, if I could swim from here, I would still be doing the race. I wouldn't be in the boat." So he begrudgingly brought the boat closer to shore. But as I swam to shore, there's, you get this timing chip that you put on your ankle for the race, which stays with you for the whole race. So a man comes out from the race to tell us that, we had to get on the boat, so we were disqualified from the race. So I hand him my timing chip, and I said, we drove like an hour and a half to get here. Can I just do the rest of the race? And he said, sure. So I rode, it's a two lap 5 mile course, 2 laps. So I went out and I rode, and then I went out to the second lap, and I had a flat tire on my bike. And so I fixed the bike, I fixed the flat tire, and I rode a little further, and then I had another flat tire on my bike. And I thought, well, this just was not meant to be. I'm done. So I started walking my bike back to the beginning of the race, and I met another guy who had also had a flat tire. So misery loves company. So we walked together, and we were chatting, and kind of out of nowhere, like another race official came and said, "You guys missed the time cutoff. You're disqualified." So my new bike flat buddy guy reaches down, and he gives the guy his timing chip. And then the guy looks at me, and I have to tell him that I've already been disqualified from this race. And so that is a double disqualified. And I went back to the transition area, and Jillian was patiently waiting for me. And she asked if I was going to go out on the run again, but I could not bear a triple disqualification from this race. So that's how you get double disqualified from a
All
track.
right.
Yeah.
All right.
The t-shirts are coming for that, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I definitely think you're right. There's a book in there somewhere.
How not to book.
So Jillian, do you want to switch over to questions? I think I see some questions here. Do we want to?
Yeah, can you see those? So Betsy asked, her first question was, did you work in any restaurants in the Hunter-Tannersville area?
I didn't, and that's an awesome question, because a lot of, the Hunter-Tannersville area is a lot like Lake Placid in that they're both ski areas and tourist kind of areas. And I worked I actually was a mason's assistant, which will make you appreciate most other jobs in your life also, because it's a really hard job. But I realized when I was doing that job, the great part about being a mason's assistant, which you will notice Colden actually does that in the book also, is that at least when you're a mason's assistant, you work hard, but you can look like you work hard. Like you can maybe smell and curse a little bit, and that's okay. But like people who work in a restaurant are working just as hard or harder, but they actually have to make it look like they're not working hard so that we can have a good time. So I did not work in a restaurant, but I appreciate people who do, because that's some tough stuff.
Okay, our second question is also from Betsy. If anybody else has questions, you can add them in the chat. So Betsy asks, what are your favorite restaurants in Lake Placid?
Oh, geez. That's a tough question. Obviously, Soulshine Bagel is my favorite place. You would think that they paid me to mention Soulshine Bagel, which they really didn't. And mostly the other place we go to is the Lake Placid Brewery. Right across from the beach is our spot, because my father-in-law really likes the beer when we were there. So those are probably my two go-to places. I used to have a friend who lived in Saranac Lake, and his apartment was 2 doors down from Paul Smith's. So we used to go down there. Oh, yeah, nice. We used to go down there, and that is a great place too. But I think if you're up in Lake Placid and you're running or riding or hiking all day, the food's going to taste good, no matter where you are.
Okay, Teresa asks, where did you get the idea for some of Rab's unique bike creations?
Well, some of them kind of exist, but Rab was kind of a funny dude. Rab just kind of got into my head. I think I said earlier, I kind of thought Rab, I didn't want Rab to be kind of like a cartoon character, like this. I don't know. I didn't want him to just come in and say some kind of funny thing with the French accent. So he just kind of kept becoming a bigger and bigger character. And some of his bike stuff is, you know, kind of what they do with triathlon bikes now. I do not have one. And the other one is I guess the one that he built, the one that I really like was the one that he built for the kid, and that reminds me a little bit of a Huffy that my mom bought me that looked a little bit like a dirt bike that all the other kids were jealous of. And now I show up on rides and I have the cheapest bike, but at the time when I was a kid, I had the bike that everyone really was jealous of.
Okay, Jonathan asks, in the course of your research, did you meet any elite athletes or coaches?
Well, you know, I know Mark Wilson kind of roughly, who is a coach, and I did a race which is another story which I will not tell, but it is also one of the reasons why I say I'm a hypothermia connoisseur. Is I have a lot of stories that involve me having hypothermia, but no, the person I probably know who's the best triathlete is a guy named Steve Becker, who lives up the street from me. And I didn't really know Steve that well until I was in Lake Placid once, and he was training. I saw him training up there, and I said, "That's the guy from the grocery store." So he was the guy actually I gave the book to say, because you know I know what it's like to be in the back of a triathlon race, sometimes lost, often hypothermic, but I don't really know what it's like to be up there when people who are actually doing it well. So I asked him to kind of, you know, if he could go through and read it and tell me anything that I got wrong. And he was one of the greatest beta readers you could ever have, because his feedback was just, it was amazing. He put as much energy into telling me about the book as I did, I think, writing it. So he was fantastic. And I don't really know if he's a good triathlete. Most triathletes are good compared to me, I guess I would say.
Okay, Dave asks, are you willing to share any of the bad ideas you had for the plot? And part two, do you see including any of the characters in a future book, or are you done with them?
I guess the original kind of bad idea I had was I had this originally in the New York City Marathon, was one of the first things that I had, and I didn't really, partially I don't really like, I guess I feel stronger about the Adirondacks than I do about New York City, so it didn't seem like a natural kind of fit to me. And then once I kind of investigated the triathlon element of it, I couldn't let that go. So that was kind of one bad idea. And I also had more, I think I have the Hamilton College riders in there, which I'm expecting a letter from Hamilton College telling me to cease and desist using their characters. But I originally had them, like, there was a bunch of things in the beginning of the book which I had cut out, and I had a lot, they were more of a kind of a foil in the early stages of the book, and I kind of cut all that stuff out because I didn't really want that in there. I don't know if I'm done with the characters. I'm partway through, about a third of the way through another book that is it actually has a triathlete in it, but it's a far different book. But I don't know that I'm done with these characters, but I would say for now I'm I have other stuff that I really want to work on. But they were great. It's funny to kind of go back to the book because it's, I worked on it for so long that, kind of a lot of it was where I was before. And I felt like kind of as a writer, I kind of felt like I got stronger as I wrote the book. And I went back and looked at some of the early pages. And that's one of the reasons I chopped off so much at the beginning, because I was like, good God, Terns, what are you doing? So, I rewrote a lot of the first part of it. And I kind of feel like in the next book, the second book that I was working on, I was able to pick up in a lot better place. But who knows?
Okay, we have another question from Betsy. Betsy, you're asking a lot of questions. She says, would you mind talking a bit about the drunk driving message?
Yeah, it's I wasn't sure like a lot of people were going to focus on that or not, but it was kind of one of the things. I think I read something about the Oklahoma City bombing, where there was like a nursery in the building, and like a lot of the kids, like if they were wearing like a green shirt or something the day that the bombing happened, like they wouldn't wear a green shirt. And so I kind of just, I guess I kind of took that kind of concept and I kind of tied that to Colden, and that this was kind of one thing that he had kind of latched onto. Like I'm sure, he had kind of heard, anybody who's lived in a small town kind of hears multiple different versions of the same story. So I think he kind of had one that maybe made him the most angry. But it also might have been the one that he could maybe do something about. So that's kind of what I have him doing. And it came halfway through the book when Steve Hadley stayed with me for longer than I thought he was going to, where Steve Hadley kind of gets that role too. And I love Steve Hadley doing that job. He's awesome. That's kind of it's another thing that worked really well into having the book in Lake Placid, was kind of having that element to it. And it's also kind of PSA also baked into the book,
Mike asks, how many times did you have to edit the book before it was published?
Oh, until my wife got sick of hearing about it. I read it and read it and read it and read it. I really couldn't tell you. It's double digits, I would say. I got to a point where I think I set it down for like a year, and then I worked on something else. And there was part of me that I thought, well, I kind of tried to ship the book around to agents and stuff. And, I think most agents kind of see, well, this is a sports book. And I had a tough time. I thought it was a lot about more than sports. But I had a hard time convincing people of that. And there was a time where I just kind of set the book aside and said, maybe this was just a project. And maybe I'll just work on something else and not really, just not go back to it. And it's funny because if I heard someone else say that, I would say, what are you thinking? You wrote a book and you're just going to let it sit on the shelf. But after a year, I picked it up and I thought, well, if I pick this up in the Open Door, I would be pretty happy reading this book. So I kind of just, I kind of did what Colden did. You just put it on the anvil and just keep hitting it with the hammer and try and making it better. But at a certain point, you're only going to live for so long. You have to kind of give the book up to the world. And I wanted to make it as good as I can, but I double digit times, I would say, that I worked on it, and that's probably not even doing it justice.
Tom asked a very similar question, or he kind of asked a question you answered a little bit there, but when you live with a book project as long as you did, how did you know when you finally reached the actual finish line of it? Did you realize this on your own, or did Jillian need to hold an intervention and say you got it?
I think she did kind of hold an intervention, but no, I felt, there was times when I would read it over again and I would let it sit for a while, and then I would read it and I would say, there's a couple parts in there that are kind of weak. And I think when I got to it's a little bit like the rest of the ideas, like setting the book in Lake Placid, where it felt right. There was, I don't, like, the heavens didn't part and there was an angel singing, but it felt right. Like it set right with me. I just knew, if you've ever been to a shelter and picked out a dog and you're like, that's the dog. You just really can't, it's hard to explain, but it just felt right to me at a certain point. It felt like the book that I wanted to send out in the world. And I couldn't find any more changes to make, I guess, is really the I think you're muted, Jillian. That has to happen.
Thank you. I had to do it at least once. Teresa asks, have you ever considered writing a nonfiction book?
Yes, I have. I've considered writing a lot of books, but I haven't gotten to it. But I have considered writing a nonfiction book. It's on my list of things to do. We've talked about turning our columns into a book, and some people have suggested that to us. And I have another fiction book that I really like, that I'm working on now. But I would like to do a nonfiction book at some point.
Okay, and Mike asks, who would you like to play Colden in the movie?
Oh boy, I guess he would have to be young, and I don't know that many young actors. That's a tough one. Partially because I don't really know anybody's name. Like if Matt Damon were younger, I would say Matt Damon, but he's like, Matt Damon's like 45. I don't think that would work. I don't know how old he is. So as a side note, I did do a triathlon, and Matt Damon's brother actually won the triathlon, and Matt Damon was at it. So I will say Matt Damon, even though I know he doesn't really fit, because I can't think of any other younger actor. But it's a good question, and I love the way you're thinking.
So Betsy asked earlier, have you ever had hypothermia? And I wasn't going to ask the question, but then I'm going to, because I know it happened at that race that Matt Damon's brother won.
Oh, yeah, yes. Well, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if you can be diagnosed with hypothermia, but I think when the people around you tell you that you're hypothermic. But yes, I told one hypothermia story, I think, to someone at work, and they said, "You seem to have an awful lot of stories that involve hypothermia," and it's true. But the one Jillian's mentioned is I did a race in the Catskills, a half Ironman in the Catskills. I believe it was the first weekend of October. And you can probably add those two things up, but the first weekend of October in the Catskills and swimming are not a good combination. And they told us, I think the water temperature was in the 50s, I think, when we started, but I think that was close to shore where it was shallow and warm. And about maybe 10 minutes into the race, I'm at the back of if you haven't gotten that by now, I'm at the back of the races almost all the time. But I was in the back of the swim course, and suddenly, this kind of wall of other racers came back at me towards the beach. And that was not the course. And I was not positive if there was maybe like a shark or something in the water. But we got to a deeper part of the lake where it was even colder than it had been when we started. So they were this was a test for Mensa, and the smart people essentially turned back and swam towards the beach. Whereas I kept going, and I swam slower, and I got an ice cream headache, and I threw up a little bit while swimming, which is not, I could have left that part out, but as I went slower, I was in the water longer, which is bad. And so when I got on shore for my I always expect a big triumphant moment in triathlon, and they never seem to come. I have more like Three Stooges moments than I do Chariots of Fire. But I got on the beach, and they say your name, like coming out of the water is the only guy left in the race. But I took a couple steps and I fell sideways, and I thought that was weird. And I stood up, and I fell sideways again. And I thought, this is weird. My stuff is not doing what I'm telling it to do. And I looked up, and the spectators that were on shore looked just horrified. Because you don't really know what you look like, I guess. When you're hypothermic, you kind of have it written on your face, but I didn't really know it. So they brought me into this. Jillian asked, if she could help me, because she was afraid I would be disqualified. And the race director assured her that I was in no danger of winning this race or having to worry at all about being disqualified. So they brought me into this little room with like a hand dryer. And I kept pushing the button on the hand dryer to put warm air on me, which it didn't really do anything. But I just kind of waited and hoped that they forgot that I was in there. And because I had been training all summer for this race, and I did not want them to tell me that I could not go on. And I was afraid if they asked me something hard, like my middle name, that I wouldn't be able to tell them. So as I left this little heated area that they had made for me, and I got on my bike, the rule in triathlon is there's an area which is roped off, and your bikes are in the rack there, and you have to walk you can't run through this area. You can't ride your bike through the area. You have to walk your bike to outside the area, and then you can start riding. And as I walked into this area, I sat down on my bike in the rack and started clipping into the pedals. And there was a race guy there, and he said, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa." He said, "You just need to just sit for a minute." So he gave me a stool, and he was giving me cups of hot water. And I sat there and I was drinking these cups of hot water, and I looked through the bike racks, and I could see there was a dude like 2 rows away. And I looked into his eyes, and I knew that I was looking into like a mirror of me. Like we were both in the exact same place. And the guy and I left on our bikes, and unfortunately most triathlons, this is what happens when you get me talking about hypothermia. Most triathlons start, the body of water is at the low point of the race. So often you have to climb on the bike to get out. So you warm up is basically the gist of that story. This race, as an extra cruel, in the Catskills, you do it in October, but it's also one of the highest points on the course is the lake. So you get on your bike and you're hypothermic, and then you don't even get to pedal. You coast downhill for a couple miles. So the other guy who was with me, he turned around and he was done. Also, that's also the test for Mensa, and he was the smart guy. And I rode for like an hour, and I started shivering really bad. And that was, I found out later, like that was coming out of the hypothermia. And I felt okay the rest of the race. I was disappointed that I did not meet Matt Damon, but that's when you're slow as I am, that's what happens is all the good cookies are gone at the end of the race and you don't get to meet Matt Damon. But that's my hypothermia. We could have a talk on hypothermia, I think, one day, and I could probably treat that.
All right, I think we can squeeze in maybe one more question before we wrap things up. This is also from Tom. He says, "For me, the hardest part of fiction writing has been getting comfortable with writing dialogue. What part of writing the book gave you the most anxiety?"
I like the dialogue. I think I told someone, there's a Yiddish expression which I would not be able to say right, but it's basically stare talk. And it's essentially you come up with the proper thing to say, like as you're leaving someone's apartment, like 30 seconds after it would have done you any good. But the beauty of writing a book is that you have that extra time to think of the dialogue. So I really enjoyed that part. I think I wanted it to kind of, I wanted to be kind of true to the characters because I really started to like them. And I think there's kind of the thing that kind of I think gave me the most anxiety is when you have a first person narrator, there's so many, I think, pitfalls that you can do. I think people are going to see him as you, which I guess, every character in the book is me to some extent. But I think, you don't want that person to be, you want to balance them. You don't want to have everyone else saying the great thing, but you don't want your person saying all the great things. So there's a lot of kind of balancing that I was thinking of. And writing a book is, it's one of the great things for me is for most of my life in almost every other endeavor, overthinking things is horrible. But in a book, you're really encouraged to overthink things. It's really what you're supposed to do. So that was really a great release for me, was to be able to overthink things and read the book 20 times and correct it. So that was, I wouldn't say that was the thing that gave me anxiety, but I think the thing that eventually in the end gave me the most anxiety was sending a book out that wasn't ready, that I think I told Jack Reitmeyer at the time, Jr., your name is on it. And I feel the same way with the columns that I write, your name is on it and you want it to be, the best thing that it can be. And that's the way that I felt about the book. And that's why I tortured myself over it for a while, even though I find it's a, kind of happy book, but I felt like I had to work on it as much to send it out into the world. So hopefully that helps. But we can do a couple more questions if you want.
That's actually all that we've got, I think.
Oh, okay.
Do you want to wrap us up, Kathleen?
Yes. So thank you very much. This was fun. And I just want to give a plug for your book again, Iron Sharpens Iron. We do have it on the shelves in the store. We've got a few left. And like I said, it's been selling really well. If you're not local, we do ship, just so you know. Just give us a call and we can help you get the book. So Herb, congratulations.
Thanks.
Really, this has been a pleasure reading this, and it's been a pleasure talking to you this evening and having you answer my questions and everybody else's questions. So it's been fun.
Thanks. If I could just add, I want to first of all thank the Open Door for, I mean, you guys have been fantastic with helping me promote the book and sell the book and doing events like this. And thanks to Kathleen. And also everybody, who came on tonight. Like, I know it's been a really long winter and this is a really nice night. And I really want to thank you for being willing to sit in front of your laptops or your phones or whatever, and instead of going outside. And I really appreciate that. The readers I've heard from have been great. And, most of you had a slip in there if you bought the book directly from me that said, go out, feel free to review the book. And if you like it, by all means, I hope you do. But I've really just been honored with, the people who've read it. Like I said, there's lots of things that you can do with your life, and to spend a couple hours with my book is really an honor. So I really wanted to just thank everybody for coming out, and hopefully, fingers crossed, this summer or next fall, we can start doing some actual in-person things, right? We can all hope for that. So
that would be wonderful. Yeah. And you inspire us to want to get outside and run and bike and swim, and the good weather's coming. So we're all going to get out there.
Find fire. Yeah.
So thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Jillian, thank you for setting this up.
Yep. Thank you, Kathleen. We appreciate it. All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Take care.
Thank you, Open Door.
You're welcome. Bye.